Welcome back, America, to the entertainment from the 573. We're back. It feels like we did this recently, but turns out it's already been almost a month. What is 2019 doing to us? But yes, we are back with an episode, kind of almost a emergency podcast and a thing we've been hyping up for a while, which we'll get into. We're here primarily for, Spider-Man is kind of the child in the middle of a divorce between Sony and Disney.
Yeah.
That's gonna be the brunt of this episode because, the mouse pays the bills.
Yeah.
But we're gonna get into kind of the elephant in the room that we've been promising for a while. And it's that, what if, or basically how Peter Lewis would book the DCEU. We said in our most recent Views from the 573, our sports podcast, which you can check out as well, that it's going to happen. And we were recording the episode, actually. I have all the stuff ready. We kind of run into the problem that made us go back to the drawing board from the first time when we tried to record it back in July. It's not going to work as a podcast.
Yeah.
But since we are multimedia journalists, or multimedia journalism majors, we realized, okay, the pod's not working, but there's another way to show it. Using the power of Wix. We're not sponsored, but I wish I was, because Wix is great.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do, it's kind of almost a special thing from the 573. We're going to create a site where we'll make the DCEU much more presentable versus me talking and not knowing how to speak for 2 hours. We'll have more information on that, so don't worry. It is coming. It's been written. It's just one of those things where it was more my hubris of saying I can do it better than DC and Warner Bros., which I obviously can.
Yeah.
Ryan and Matt have seen what I've written, so they know that's true.
Yeah.
It's just we want to get the presentation right, and we kind of realize 2 hours of me talking about a couple of films and then doing another part of the same thing isn't really that fun. But a website allows us much more creative freedom to have links to these characters so you can know more about them. So that's what we're going to be doing down the road. I'm going to be getting started this as soon as I can, so don't worry, kids. I'm sorry that the DCU took another turn. It's another rewrite in a different sense.
Yeah.
Or reshoot, I should say. But it is happening because, let's be real, we've hyped it up for too long, we can't just back off. So
Yeah.
It will happen in a different form, not audio. But that's the way media's going, kids. You gotta be prepared.
Yeah.
So that's that. That's the elephant out of the room. Hopefully, within 2-3 weeks, I can get at least the first part of the DCU on, because it's as big and stupid as you thought it would be. But with that said, Ryan, how are you doing?
Doing good, Peter. And we got something big to talk about.
Pretty much the only real thing to talk about for the show.
Yeah, we got to talk about the mouse in the room. You see what I did there, everybody? Whatever.
Isn't there like a fairy tale or like a story where like an elephant was scared of a mouse?
Probably. There probably was. So everybody,
sounds right.
Everybody, get your Mickey Mouse ears ready. If you've gone to Disneyland or Disney World, get ready to put them on. Actually, you might not like to hear what me and Peter have to say about Disney, but that's kind of a little hint of where I'm leaning towards, at least. I don't know where Peter's leaning towards, but yeah, the mouse in the room is Disney and Sony. Of course, they had a sharing agreement with Spider-Man going all the way back to, I believe, 2015 was when this deal was announced.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since then, we've had Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We've had him introduced in Civil War. He's had 2 solo films with Homecoming and Far From Home. And he's also been in Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. And so the news that came down yesterday afternoon was that Marvel and Sony, they're renegotiating this deal. The deal was up after some time. The original deal, Tom Holland, he had one more Spider-Man film left on this deal, so they had to go and find a way to rework this. The news comes down is that Marvel Studios and Sony Pictures are no longer collaborating on this, that for the moment, that they've both gone their separate ways on this sharing agreement.
I do want to jump in real quick because we probably should remind them of what the original deal stated. If you probably realized this when you saw Homecoming and Far From Home, that the Sony logo was the primary signature, because those two films were technically released by Sony. The deal was, it was a 5-film deal that included Civil War, Spider-Man Homecoming, Infinity War, Endgame, and of course Far From Home. It was that 5-film deal that they were going to have the character of Spider-Man be developed in partnership with Sony and Marvel, which is basically at that point just Sony and Kevin Feige.
Yes.
So that expired, and we were kind of, I guess we all just kind of didn't really think about it because of how well it went, that, oh, yeah, of course they'll continue this.
It made $1 billion.
Exactly. Well, obviously that's not happening, as Ryan just said.
Yeah.
So that's where we are. The deal is done. Basically, Sony's commitment to Disney has ended. There's nothing really stopping them. It's just the awkward situation of, well, you do have the Spider-Man films, but they're so built around the MCU that kind of no longer like if they, let's say the nightmare scenario is they make the next Spider-Man movie and there's no reference to the MCU, the Avengers, or any of that. It's going to stand out.
It is. And the big trouble is, how do you get rid of that? And the only solution I came across while thinking about this is, listen, they did make a slight mention of multiverse in Far From Home. I know a lot of people don't like multiverse and like all the crazy convoluted stuff going on with that. But in this case, if Sony and Disney do not go back to the negotiation table, then that's probably the only way you're going to be able to do that, is have Spider-Man go to another universe. Or as Sony would like to call it, the Sony Cinematic Universe, or the Venomverse, for want of a better term. But, yeah, that's going to be the thing that stands out, is how do you get rid of that? And also, I've heard this, there's several specifics we're going to have to talk about with this, is that what happens with all the characters that were introduced in the Marvel films, in the Marvel Sony films. I've heard conflicting stuff about this. I've heard from one group saying they can't use any of that. Not the suits, not MJ, Ned, none of that. They can't reference it at all. But I've also heard, since it is a Sony film, and that Sony did put a majority of backing into these productions, is that they could still use them. Which one is it? I'm not sure. Hopefully we'll find out more about that if, worst case scenario, this does end up sticking and Spider-Man is going to be in Sony's universe that they're now building and not in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's a bunch of stuff, and of course the original deal, and it also included, let's talk about what Disney and Disney and Sony were negotiating. So
yeah, I think that's the biggest key to all of this, because I don't think people realize how kind of crazy the deal was favored for Sony in the first place, which kind of makes sense because, the ball's in your court. You own Spider-Man. You own the Spider-Man universe. So
yes,
for Disney, you kind of had to do whatever you could to get Spider-Man involved.
Well, I will say, they do own the merchandising rights as Spider-Man.
Yes.
They do own all that, the TV shows, merchandising. I think even somewhere, I think I even heard even the Spider-Man PS4 game, that they own the merchandising rights to some of that as well.
Well, that makes sense, because Sony, PlayStation 4.
Yeah, it does. And so, one of the aspects you mentioned, the original deal that you didn't mention, was Marvel would receive in the range of 5% of the first dollar gross, which that means basically whatever they receive the first day the movie's out in theaters.
Which I think that's what really got them irked, because especially in Far From Home and Homecoming, they were doing the brunt of the work, which meant Sony gets the majority of the money. So I think that irked them, because actually, surprisingly, the Disney was saying, hey, let's change this 95-5 to 50-50.
Yeah. And let's talk about the 50-50 stuff for a second. So, one of the big negotiating factors that caused this sharing agreement to split sides for the time being was Marvel, Disney. They were wanting to negotiate a 50-50 co-financing arrangement between the two studios. But that also means not only would and Marvel, Disney, and Sony would be able to finance the films, that also means whatever the film makes, Disney's going to get half the profit. And taking a look at it, if you want to go by specifics, like, sure, Far From Home made $1 billion, but you got to take in like production costs, what it took to make it, advertising, marketing, stuff like that, other stuff. You still have maybe about 400-500 million left. And if this deal were to go in effect, that means if, say they did this with Far From Home, and you have $500 million to work with, Sony gets 250 of that. That's not a bunch. And Disney gets 250 of it. And let's be honest, Disney's already making enough money as it is. They've got, what, $5-6 billion films this year. And so, I guess people are now getting out to where I'm kind of leaning like, Disney is not looking good here, is that Disney got a little bit greedy here. And one of the other aspects of this was they were saying we would be willing to finance some of your spin-off movies, like a Venom 2, which there's stuff going out with that, Andy Serkis being attached to that, stuff like that, Morbius, Craven, the Hunter films, stuff like that. Essentially, Disney's saying, hey, don't worry about it. We'll take all your properties off your hand. At first, I was like, okay, that's something that could work with, but reading more and hearing more people talk about this, I'm kind of like, you know what? At some points, it's good, but you are taking away Sony's properties, and essentially, they're not Sony's anymore. They're yours. Which, that's probably kind of a hitting point with Sony, like, hey, we don't like that part. And the 50-50 stuff, one of the rumors I heard was Sony came back, they said, hey, let's do 70-30. And that's actually more reasonable. Like, hey, you don't... I get what Disney's trying to do, like, hey, let's try and make our biggest offer here, and let's see where it gets us, and then maybe that could be a negotiating point, maybe see we can how much we can get. If we have to go a little bit lower, fine, let's see how much we can get. But looking at this, 70-30, that's actually really good compared to where they're at right now. 95-5 is where they were at a couple days ago. If you go to 70-30, that's a good increase. And the deal, I think you and me can both agree with this, as well as several other people. This has worked really, really well. Putting him in big films like Endgame and Infinity War, I'm not saying that Spider-Man helped those profits in any way, but it certainly didn't hurt it. And having Sony's biggest franchise character in those films, one is now the all-time highest grossing movie of all time. That certainly helps, especially when we go into the negotiation table. And the 70-30 split, that helps out. And also, you can maybe increase the first dollar gross percentage that you're making. Maybe instead of 5%, up it to 10, up it to 15. It's kind of like you have a job and you're making, like, say, let's throw a number here, $25,000 a year. You can go ask for a raise and, like, hey, I feel like this is what I feel like I'm worth. I've put in work. This has been successful. Stuff like that. But I want to raise it. And that's a fair starting point in which, like, okay, we can go from 25,000 to maybe 30 or 35,000. And maybe you can work with that. In which case, Sony actually did something right here and saying, hey, let's do a 70-30 split. And so that ends up not working. Of course, you get this news going down. And yeah, so now we're in this situation where we don't know what's going to happen next. Of course, Marvel announces the What If series. And this is the hugest what if right now.
Yeah.
And I think the next point I want to go to is, does Sony necessarily need Marvel? And does Disney need Spider-Man? I'm going to point out, I think from Disney's side, I don't think they necessarily need him. But you already started off all the stuff with them. Of course, you got the Far From Home stuff, which, let's also bring up Far From Home. It's kind of a pointless film now with the ending.
Yeah.
That's the huge thing. It's just, there's that, but with Sony, I think, listen, they were in a sticky situation after The Amazing Spider-Man 2. That film, although it got a lot of money, it made like over 800 million. People did not like it. They did not like where they were going with it. They stuffed too much stuff in there. And then 2 years later, you had Tom Holland, his version of Spider-Man in Civil War. And
that's what I wanted to bring up about, from Marvel's point of view, the MCU. I guess to be easy, I'll just call them Disney and Sony, because that's probably the best way to differentiate. For Disney, Spider-Man's great to have as a franchise.
Yeah.
But if you want to be serious, his point is done. Because he was, in the actual comic, the Civil War comic, he was important, even though Civil War wasn't really Civil War. But you had him in there just to be fun. Endgame and Infinity War were kind of like your big Marvel events.
Yeah.
Because basically, Fox still has X-Men. Well, now Disney has them, of course. But for what Endgame and Infinity War represented, it was more the non-X-Men, the big non-X-Men piece.
Yeah.
It only made sense you get Spider-Man for that, because it feels like, okay, this is the Marvel Cinematic Universe in its best form.
Yeah.
Now that he's gone, if your intention was for him to be the next Iron Man, because I always thought that role was going to go to T'Challa.
Yeah.
Because, of course, the vibranium, even though he didn't have the personality of Tony Stark, it didn't really bother me because, let's be real, Peter Parker doesn't have the personality of Tony Stark. So there's a lot of interesting ends there. Or if they just don't even want to have, somebody take up that mantle as the Thor, Captain America, or Iron Man type character, just have, them be themselves.
Yeah.
So I think for Disney, it's actually easy not to have Spider-Man.
Yeah, and
And for Sony, it's easy because now you have... That's the weird thing for Sony, is that if you truly back away, which I think, looking at this now, we'll get more into it later when we put odds on it, I think it's kind of 50-50 of what they're going to do.
Yeah.
It hurts them because, sure, Holland is contractually obligated for one more film, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
so they could do...
Well, they did say that they do plan on having 2 more Spider-Man films, and Holland will certainly be in them, but people are now unsure of whether Watts was going to be able to do the 3rd one.
Mm-hmm. And again, with, the Amazing Spider-Man films, they had 4 planned, but of course 2 failed, so they canceled it outright. So
yeah,
these deals, even though you're obligated to do it, it can just not happen in the end. Like Superman Returns, Brandon Roth was, I think, signed on for 3 more films, or 2 more, and of course it bombed, so they were like, okay, no more Brandon Roth Superman, go home.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's probably the worst thing to say. They could just reboot Spider-Man again.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that point of like whether they could use some of the stuff that was introduced. Like, of course, you probably don't need to have the Stark Spider-Man suits, stuff like that. But I think you're fine with having some of the characters in there, and a couple points with the Disney stuff, or why maybe they're fine with not having him. Although, I'll use this analogy. It's kind of like the Golden State Warriors. You get Kevin Durant, and Kevin Durant is clearly a luxury for that team. Despite whatever they're saying, like, oh, how they need him to win a title, he's a luxury for him. Spider-Man, even though he is the face of Marvel, when he asks, who do you associate Spider-Man with? You associate him with Marvel, not Sony. Even though, like, Spider-Man is the face of Marvel, he's a luxury for the MCU because and like you said it best, like it's been a good run of Spider-Man that the MCU has given us with this introduction in Civil War and all the way and leading up to the stuff in Infinity War and Endgame, and also with the MCU. The MCU started out having B-level and C-level characters introduced, and they end up making big franchises out of them. And then you go to more obscure characters like the Doctor Strange, like the Guardians of the Galaxy, and you do the same thing with them. And you look at Marvel's slate with what they got going on. It's good. Like they see what they did in the early couple phases. And it's easy to say they think they can do it again. You got Shang-Chi. Not a lot of whole people know him. You got that. You got. I'm trying to think what else is out there on the slate that's new. It's escaping my mind right now, but like the
Eternals.
Yeah, Eternals. That's really obscure. That's probably more obscure than Guardians.
I think just for Disney in general is that they've proven they can roll with the punches.
Yeah.
Because clearly Guardians 3 was supposed to be out much sooner, but of course they kind of done goofed themselves with James Gunn, fired him, he went to do Suicide Squad, and they're like, oh, you can come back now. It's like, well, I gotta finish this first. It's like, all right. So it's not a killer for Disney at all.
Yeah. But I will tell you...
But it's just kind of awkward to, suddenly like, hey, Spider-Man's gone. The catalyst for Tony Stark to be like, you know what, I have a second chance, but I'm going to risk it all to undo the snap.
Yeah, and...
Because if it wasn't for him holding that picture of him and Peter Parker, he would not have invented time travel.
And here's another thing. I mentioned that Disney, Marvel, whoever you want to say, has the merchandising rights. Now, here's something. If you want to say Disney can throw out the punches and they can play hardball, you know what they can do? They just like, oh, you guys want to do Into the Spider-Verse? You guys want to do another Spider-Man PS4 game? Well, guess what? We're not going to let you guys do it. Mm-hmm. And
that's the big thing. Disney owns Marvel. The problem was in the 90s, Marvel started selling the film rights to other companies.
Yeah, right.
But here's the thing. The people writing the comics are Disney.
Yeah.
So if Disney wanted to, they could make Spider-Man comics god-awful. They could bury the character hard. They could make him look like the worst thing in the comic book world. Which, again, most people aren't reading comics. But hey, they do make news every now and then. Like, when they decided to give the title of Thor to Jane Foster, spoiler alert, people were talking about that,
yes,
even though no one bought it. I mean, in the 90s when DC announced the death of Superman, people went to buy that like crazy. It's like, what? You're killing Superman? What are you, mad? So, even though people aren't buying comics, they still matter to an extent.
Yeah.
So, that's an option. But then if the point is to, get Spider-Man back because people don't like the character now, well, now you have to kind of rebuild him, which is what you destroyed.
And you know what?
So, there's that weird scenario.
You know what? That could really hurt Sony. That can be a big loss to Sony. And, like, he talked about, like, this is as much of a loss for Sony as it is for Disney. Disney, they come out looking greedy. At the same time, can you really blame them? I mean, listen, of course, I had the analogy earlier. You want to ask for a little bit more, and if you do, good. And this worked out great for you so far. What they did was crazy and outlandish. But at the same time, Sony here, I mean, have you looked at did you take a look at their stock yesterday?
Yeah, it took a hit.
It took a big hit. And a lot of people, you're saying that online, say Spidey from Sony, all this stuff. You know what?
You had Jeremy Renner make a post on Instagram about calling Sony out, which was just great.
And also you had Ryan Reynolds saying, The only thing you see Deadpool and Spider-Man in, it's in his heart. And it's just crazy. It's madness what is going on here. But oh man, this is.
Yeah, about to say we should probably answer the question in the room. Whose side are you on so far?
I'll tell you,
I'm kind of on Disney's because I understand more from their point of, even though Disney's, which is hard for me to say because Disney is one of the most greedy companies ever, and I kind of despise them for numerous reasons.
Thank you for writing our paychecks.
Even though they destroyed public domain, but hey, whatever. At least here, I kind of get that, yeah, you're doing the brunt of the work here. And Sony's just kind of reaping the reward.
Yes. I'll say this.
But I do get Sony's point because you have the rights.
Yeah.
It's your kid.
Yeah. I'll say this. I'm not on any side. I think, listen, there's 3 types of losers in this. Disney, Sony, and us.
Also, the 4th one, the probably the saddest one, Tom Holland.
Yeah, we haven't even mentioned that. How is he dealing with all this?
I can only imagine he is probably the one who is in the most worst state out of everyone in this situation.
Yeah.
Fans, Marvel, or Sony.
Yeah, he does not know what his future is going to look like, and he's openly stated he loves working in the MCU. He loves working with all those characters. And now...
I remember when he was like, I'll do this for 20 more films. It's like, dude, you just blew your whole negotiation.
Exactly. Yeah.
But like I say, no matter how you feel about his portrayal of the character, like, you gotta admit, the kid has passion for it.
He loves it.
Which I think is great. That's not to say, of course, Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield had passion, but I think he's bringing something they haven't yet. He's kind of that perfect middle ground.
Yes.
Or he's really getting close to it, I would say.
And of course, Sony put out a response last night.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like, for the moment, there's any bad blood between the 2 studios.
Yeah, I'm actually going to read their tweet real quick, just to get them, because we kind of haven't got their side of the story just yet. So, quote, much of today's news about Spider-Man has mischaracterized recent discussions about Kevin Feige's involvement in the franchise. We are disappointed but respect Disney's decision not to have him continue as lead producer of our next live-action Spider-Man film. We hope this might change in the future, but understand that the many new responsibilities that Disney has given him, including all their newly added Marvel properties, do not allow him to work on IP they do not own. Kevin is terrific. We are grateful for his help and guidance, and we appreciate the path he put us on, which we will continue. Which is kind of that was revealing to me, because definitely the whole reason Sony gave them Disney the chance to do Spider-Man was because they messed up by getting too involved in Raimi's Spider-Man 3, which made Spider-Man 4 obsolete, rebooting with Garfield and getting it wrong. So they were kind of like, oh, what do we do with this character? It's one of the most iconic within Marvel.
Yeah.
I mean, even me being a DC guy, Spider-Man's still in my top 3 with Batman and Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
He somehow beat out Superman. So I think, and if you're a Marvel fan, he's probably guaranteed in the top 3 and maybe even number 1. Because that's the thing. DC's Trinity is easy to get right. Marvel's is kind of open, but I feel like every version has Spider-Man.
Yeah, and here's a couple things I'm taking away from this right now. Number 1, who's making the statement, and also who's involved with all this decision making? Well, it's Tom Rothman and probably Avi Arad. And let's put a reminder to everybody out there. Tom Rothman, I know his name has been brought up a lot, at least on this podcast. Probably the first time we're mentioning it. He was somewhat involved with X-Men 3 Last Stand and X-Men Origins Wolverine. Last I checked, those 2 weren't good films. And then Avi Arad, you guys know the story. He got really involved in Spider-Man 3. He wanted Venom. Raimi was like, no, I don't want to. It doesn't fit the story. He's like, no, we're doing this anyway. And I heard an example today. And I don't know if I was ever aware of this, but when they were filming the first Avengers movie, is that originally Joss Whedon wanted the Wasp in there. But Marvel was like, no, we want Black Widow in there. You introduced her already in Iron Man 2. And Joss Whedon was like, you know what? Fine, I'll do it. And I'll do the best job I can with Black Widow. I'm going to do a great job with it. Sam Raimi, he was kind of like, whatever, it's Venom, whatever. And it gave us a crappy version. Mm-hmm. And also, going back to the Feige mention, like, he might be overloaded with this. I do not believe that for 1 second. Yes, they got a lot more IP now with Fantastic Four and the X-Men, but listen, I'm not going to believe Kevin Feige's overworked until the guy says it, until it comes from his mouth.
In 2008, he was involved with 4 films at once, producing Iron Man and Incredible Hulk, as well as being someone involved in Punisher Warzone and a direct-to-video animated film. He's actually been involved in Marvel since 2000's X-Men as an associate producer.
Yeah, and that's one of the great...
You look at the list, he, up until Iron Man, he had pretty much been involved in all the Marvel films released. Even the TV, made-for-TV Man-Thing.
Yeah.
And he was involved as a executive producer on The Amazing Spider-Man. And, just so that, even while the MCU was really kicking off, he was even helping Sony at the beginning. Yes.
Yeah, he was. So, Peter, I'll say this, and we make a lot of jokes here at 573 Productions. You, me, Matt, I know Frogger's a big thing for us. Let's push it back a little bit. Let's get on the Night Monkey film with it if things go sideways. There's great potential there. There is great potential there. And I think let's talk about Sony's perspective on this. So you get Spider-Man to appear in your universe now. You already know what the first thing they're looking at to put him in. Mm-hmm. Venom 2.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, of course, Andy Serkis, you got him to direct. You got big-time cinematographer that's worked on big-time films. And you got Tom Hardy helping write the film there as well. And it sounds like Venom 2 is going to be different from Venom. Now, I was the only one out of all 3 of us to see Venom. And
yep, that's still true.
And I'll say this. It's a good, bad movie. It has its moments, particularly, and this is a big thing they need to hit on, is the interaction between the Venom symbiote and Eddie Brock. And they did a good job with it. It was great. And let me tell you, Peter, there's some humor in there that I could have sworn was like, did Peter Lewis write these? It sounded like the interactions were great. And listen, I know there's a lot of criticism come about like how Venom looked as well. I loved how he looked. That's how he looked back in the comics. Big, crazy looking. And of course, the thing missing was the spider logo, and for obvious reasons. But I thought it was a decent film, and of course, it made over $800 million.
I will say, since my recording situation isn't the best, it's almost poetic justice that a thunderstorm is now moving over my house. So if you hear that in the background, I think Big G above is giving his take on the whole Sony Disney situation. He ain't happy with it.
Well, none of us are happy here on Earth either. So
no.
Yeah.
But here's my guess about a Spider-Man cinematic universe, because that's what they were trying to do for Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah.
The goal of Amazing Spider-Man 2 was to set up Sinister Six and all them. There's so much in the That's what I really loved about Spider-Man, being really the only Marvel property I ever was into or read as a child, or still really pay attention to today. Is that there's so many, we saw in the Into the Spider-Verse. There's so many versions of Spider-Man. It's just such a interesting character they've done. He's got the best rogue gallery of any Marvel character. And
yes.
I mean, you could say, even compared to a lot of DC heroes, the only ones who got better than him, I would say, is Batman.
Yeah, I agree.
So there's a lot to work with, but my problem with the Spider-Man universe is it's all in New York. You can't put it anywhere else, really.
Well,
and that's the thing. That what worked for the MCU is that there's so many different places to take it, where it doesn't feel, stale.
Well, Peter, you can take him to San Francisco, and Venom 2 is like, oh, I'm going on another trip.
That's true, but again, I mean, Sinister Six, I mean, You could have it popping up around the world. Kraven the Hunter can be in Russia. There's ways to take it, but at the end of the day, it's going to come back to one place.
Yeah.
Which I just don't know how they can write themselves out of that corner. Now, again, when I read that Sony tweet, they said they learned some stuff. So maybe their intention was, okay, let's give it to the people who know what they're doing, take some notes, and then go back to the drawing board.
That's very possible.
If that's what they're doing, I could totally see it. Because, again, Disney was doing all the work, and obviously they were involved because, hey, they're putting their name on it as the distributor. So they probably picked up on some stuff that they didn't know what to do originally. Maybe don't get too involved in production.
Yeah.
Don't tell filmmakers, especially filmmakers that have vision. Like, this is what, if we can trash talk DC for a sec, this was DC's problem, is that, like, especially in Suicide Squad, you hired David Ayer, someone with a vision, someone with actual ideas, not, a Brett Ratner who will do anything you say. Again, with what I saw of the original draft for Suicide Squad, it may not have been the best movie in the world, but it was much better than what we got.
Yes.
So that's the thing. If Sony finally learned not to be too interfere too much, that's good. But here's the problem with Sony: is they're a studio that's clearly desperate for a hit.
Yeah.
They have tried everything and not much has worked.
Yeah.
The remember the Ghostbusters remake?
Ugh.
They're trying everything and just nothing can seem to stick for them. They are a very desperate studio right now. So it's probably hard for them not to get involved.
Yeah.
Because they really need Spider-Man to work.
And here's some interesting points that just come across my mind is what looked like that Marvel and Sony was working towards with is that they were looking at making Spider-Man stand alone by himself. Mm-hmm. It looked like they were heading towards that, and like Tom Holland is young enough to where like you can't have 10 years worth of films to where like you can do that. And you don't have a question about how if he looks his age or not. Mm-hmm. And I think Sony is probably looking at that like maybe we should do that right now, because now after the spot he was left in after Far From Home, and now you don't know whether you're going to get to do with all this stuff that's involved in that universe and put him in your own universe. Maybe you can do that, but I think if they were to agree to this, agree to a new deal, they can move towards that. And who knows, maybe they could include some of these characters that they're working on. I know that there's some talk of maybe trying to get a Venom in the MCU if it worked. If they could figure out something to where like maybe it was a possibility. But another thing here is, if this is the road we're heading towards, I think the best case scenario is, of course, we get Venom 2 and it's Spidey in there. But again, we've seen a Spidey versus Venom.
I just remembered Sony has Morbius as well. That's another property they own that they're working on.
Yeah, and of course there were rumors about maybe doing a Kraven film. You could do a Kraven's Last Hunt.
The big thing they wanted out of Amazing Spider-Man stuff was a Sinister Six movie.
Yeah.
So there's that interesting thing there. They could be the studio that actually has proper villain movies.
Yeah, and I think they should be taking tips from how well the Joker movie is going to do. Mm-hmm. Although it's a drastically different character, take some tips from that and apply them to some of your films. And I think, listen, Spidey and Venom 2, good. We're getting to see some of that. Holland and Hardy, they've expressed an interest in wanting to make this happen. Of course, this is not how either of them envisioned it. And we have seen Spidey go against Venom in Spider-Man 3. It wasn't great. But I think maybe with this one, with two actors that love these characters and are willing to put their passion into these projects, despite what Holland may be feeling right now, if this is a road he goes down towards, you're just going to have to make the best of, in his case, a bad situation and make do with this. And who knows? Venom 2 might be good. Andy Serkis, I think, is actually a good director because he is the king of how to do motion capture. And you pair him along with the Venom film, and what's Venom a character for? Motion capture.
Yeah. I'm thinking if they were going to reboot this from the ground up, what you would have for a cinematic universe.
Yeah.
Spider-Man, of course, Peter Parker.
Yes.
In the actual comics, Venom, of course, was either Eddie Brock or Flash Thompson.
Yeah.
And what happened was in those universe, Flash Thompson went to war, yada yada, becomes Venom, becomes the anti-hero we know. You got those through. What did I just say? So you got Spider-Man and Venom. You can do Black Cat. That'd be an interesting thing.
Yeah.
You got another anti-hero there. You could have. What else could they? What am I missing? So there's your first three right there. Because I'm looking at the Spider-Man supporting characters that he's had. Yeah, that's your three franchises. If you want to have, Kraven and Sinister Six on the side doing stuff, but again, it can work.
Well, Peter, we're definitely getting Morbius. Yeah. We're getting Jared Leto's.
That's right.
We're getting Jared Leto's method acting.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
I'm just trying to wonder because again, I'm more of a DC guy. Admittedly, I think Morbius has been involved in Spider-Man. Don't quote me on that. But maybe not primary.
Yeah. And you know what? Another thing that they could be looking towards that with the future. Venom? I'll tell you what, Peter. Go give this a watch. I think go give Venom a watch and maybe, if this is the road we're heading towards, maybe give that a watch and maybe see what the feeling is about introducing a Spidey into this. But they did tease Carnage at the end. You could do something crazy where you could do Maximum Carnage, where you have Venom and Spider-Man team up and face Carnage. Now that could be some fun. If we are indeed going down the path where Spider-Man's in the Sony universe with all their characters, that could be some fun.
Yeah. And the more I think, it's actually probably easy for Sony to do this. Just straight up say, we're taking our ball and going home. Because of course people are like, oh, we're going to boycott if they do it without Marvel. Or Disney, I should say. It's such a weird situation Marvel got themselves in.
Yeah.
Yet they're still doing better than Warner Brothers, who owns everything DC.
Yeah.
Like there's no excuse. Because remember when Captain Marvel was coming out, we were all pretty sure with all the controversy surrounding it that movie was not gonna do well financially. Well, what happened? It hit $1 billion, and we were like, wow.
Yeah.
That was unexpected. So maybe Sony kind of realizes, hey, you just wear the controversy and people will still come out and see it. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The key for them is you gotta make a good movie.
Yes. That is the ultimate key. You got, that's first and foremost. You gotta get a good story.
I'm almost wondering, because again, even though they have Holland contracted again, they could just say, okay, we're done. Because they have all the power.
Yeah.
In that situation.
And here's the funny thing.
You could reboot it.
You know what's this weekend, Peter?
D23.
Yep.
Which they already teased. They have a big announcement tomorrow, so who knows? Maybe the time we release this, they say we've come to an agreement. Spider-Man's safe. So this whole last 44 minutes has been pointless.
And yeah, who knows? Maybe they can do something at D23. It's like, hey guys, guess what? We got 10 more Spider-Man films. Let's go.
Yeah.
Like
we just bought Sony.
That'll be the real big bombshell. The internet will completely lose it.
I bet the stockholders will be like, oh, what's happening?
And somebody has brought up, like, could they buy Spider-Man? And that's been brought up. But the thing is, Sony wants they want a whole lot for it. I've heard some people say $4 to $5 billion. Like, that's absurd. You're not going to pay that much for a character. But
yeah, I'm trying to wonder how much is he actually worth?
You gotta be worth a whole lot. I mean, you mentioned Spidey is, let's be honest, Marvel's crown jewel. Again, when people say Spider-Man, they're like, oh, that's Marvel. That's their character.
When Marvel or Disney bought Marvel outright, it was worth $4 billion, same as Star Wars.
Yeah.
It would be a turn to learn that Spider-Man is valued the same as the entirety of Marvel, which he is part of, and Star Wars, Lucasfilm.
That's insane.
But of all the franchises, I mean, I can only imagine Batman's had more films.
Yeah.
And that's, multiple years. I mean, let's think about that. There were the first 3 Spider-Man. There were the 2 Amazing Spider-Mans. You've obviously had 2 with Holland. If you're just counting that, that's already 7 since 2002.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he's well known.
Yes, he is. And Peter, I think, and wrapping up here, regardless of which side you're on, whether it's Sony, Disney, or you're anti-Sony or anti-Disney, I think we can all agree. We just want them to come to an agreement and work this out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more because how the character is currently set up, where you kind of expect it to be part of the greater cinematic universe.
Yes.
It's just going to create an awkward situation for both sides. There's part of me that, even though looks at it as 50-50, I think eventually they'll come together again with a new deal. Maybe I think the new point they could agree on is 80-20 in favor of Sony.
Yeah.
Because in that way you can think, okay, we're still getting the overwhelming majority, but at least Marvel can be like, we just quadrupled what we were getting beforehand.
Yeah.
I'm not good at math, so.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's one of the weirdest situations, but I guess we probably should have seen it coming. We just completely forgot after Far From Home. Hey, that's the end of the 5-film deal.
Yeah.
Which, again, Sony's goal was to get a Spider-Man film out every 2 years.
Yeah.
So 2021, if they really want to do one more of Holland just to end it, it's going to come up fast. Production's got to be starting soon, so you got to imagine Disney. I could see Disney just for the sake of Spider-Man 3, because it sounds like the New Avengers is a long way down the road.
Yeah.
They could maybe say, okay, let's just do one more film, 95-5. Just to give themselves some more time. Buy themselves some more time, because they can afford it.
Yes.
Which is kind of funny to say, because their next year is kind of risky when you think about it. You have a Black Widow movie, which is great, but it almost feels like it's 6 years too late, and she's dead.
Yeah.
So, and Eternals, I mean, sure, they've proven they can take the most obscure things like Guardians of the Galaxy and make it work, but is Eternals too obscure?
Which, Peter, I will say, if this doesn't work out, you know what the first thing they could fast track is? Fantastic Four.
Yep. Absolutely.
They could...
Or X-Men.
Yeah, or X-Men. They could easily do it like, you know what? Let's change our plans. Listen, Marvel always has contingencies. Like, going back to when they were trying to get Spider-Man. They had contingencies. They were originally going to have Black Panther kind of be in the Spider-Man role that he was in during that film. And I think you were going to have the Wasp in there. And so you're going to have Ant-Man and the Wasp in there. And then this happened and say, hey, listen, guys, we got Spider-Man. Let's fix something up. And so, knowing Marvel, knowing Disney, they have contingencies. And if this doesn't go their way, it's like, all right, let's fast track Fantastic Four. Let's get that ready. So, I think that's a good place to leave it off, Peter.
Yeah. About after 15 minutes, I think we've pretty much covered every scenario there was. But who knows? This story could change the moment we upload it.
Yes, it could. So, guys, that'll do it for this emergency pod. I think this is the first real emergency pod we've kind of done. And it was a doozy of one.
Yeah.
So, that'll do it for this special edition of the Entertainment from the 573 podcast. Again, guys, be sure to go look us up on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you guys get your podcasts. Go subscribe and keep up with all the latest action from us, as well as our YouTube channel, Podcast from the 573, where you can listen to the YouTube version of the podcast. Go follow us there, subscribe, give us a like, and hit the notification bell to keep up with all the latest action from us on there as well. And also, go check out Views from the 573, where we just posted an episode. Go listen to that one in the meantime. Again, who knows if something happens with this deal? Something they could strike an agreement tomorrow morning, Like, well, here's this. What do I do with this? Oh, all right, delete it. It doesn't matter anymore. Like, there's 15 minutes of my life right there.
Plus the 30 minutes of trying to do the DCEU.
Yeah, so there's about an hour and a half of my life right there.
But that's the news cycle, I guess.
Yeah, that is the news cycle. If that's one thing we learned in school, that's it. But thank you guys for listening to this emergency podcast. Hopefully everything all works out in the end. That being said, we will talk to you guys next time.